The stars trembled under the might of the Arthanis royal fleet. 300 worlds had fallen before them, their civilizations either assimilated or reduced to ashes. At the helm of this unstoppable armada stood Grand Marshal Kalor, the unconquerable, whose tactical genius had expanded the Empire's reach across 50 years of relentless conquest. The year was 3125, nearly a century after the Chaos Wars that had fractured the old alliances and left countless systems vulnerable. From these ashes, the Arthanis dynasty had risen with singular purpose: galactic dominion through absolute force. Kalor stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Imperator, watching as the final bombardment of Thanaris came to its inevitable conclusion. The planet's defense grid had collapsed after merely 3 days of siege, a disappointment for a man who had come to savor the challenge of worthy opponents. "Another victory for the Royal Archives, Grand Marshal," said Vice Marshal Saren, his second in command, her voice carrying the cold precision that had made her invaluable in their campaigns. Thanaris marks the 300th world under Arthanis control. Kalor nodded, his face impassive beneath the ceremonial battle mask that had become his symbol across the stars. Few had seen what lay beneath it in decades, a face that had forgotten how to express anything but grim determination. "Inform the Royal Council," he replied, turning away from the viewport as the last flames of resistance flickered out on the planet's surface. "They will be pleased." "They already are." Saren handed him a communication crystal. A direct message from the inner chamber. Kalor accepted the crystal, pressing it against the neural interface at his temple. The voices of the Royal Council flooded his consciousness. A chorus of congratulations quickly followed by new orders that made even his battle-hardened resolve falter for a moment. "The Kandra Prime system," he said after the message ended, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. "The final holdout." Saren's eyes widened slightly. "Complete annihilation protocol?" "Those are our orders." Kalor confirmed. "No survivors, no negotiations. The Council demands an example be made of the last system that dares defy Imperial rule." The Kandra Prime system was known throughout the galaxy for its stubborn independence, a collection of planets whose inhabitants had somehow maintained their autonomy through generations of turmoil. Their resistance had become symbolic, a beacon for those who whispered of freedom from Arthanis control. "Prepare the fleet," Kalor commanded. "We depart for Kandra Prime immediately." As the Imperator broke orbit from the conquered Thanaris, Kalor retreated to his private chambers. There, surrounded by the trophies of 50 years of warfare, he removed his mask and stared at his reflection in the polished surface of a ceremonial shield taken from a fallen king decades ago. Lines of conquest were etched into his face, his eyes holding the cold distance of a man who had overseen the subjugation of billions. Yet something about the Council's orders disturbed him in ways he could not articulate. Complete annihilation was not unprecedented in Arthanis conquest, but it had always been reserved for worlds that posed genuine threats to the Empire's security. "Kandra Prime is merely symbolic," he murmured to himself. "Their military capabilities are negligible." A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. "Grand Marshal," came the voice of Professor Lear, his strategic advisor. "The fleet is prepared for departure, but I've taken the liberty of compiling intelligence on Kandra Prime that you may find relevant." "Enter," Kalor commanded, replacing his mask. Professor Lear, a tall, thin figure whose intellect had earned him one of the few positions of influence open to non-military personnel within the Arthanis hierarchy, stepped into the chamber. His eyes betrayed no emotion as he placed a data crystal on Kalor's desk. "Kandra Prime's resistance is not military in nature," Lear explained. "Their strength lies in cultural resilience, 300 years of attempted invasions, and they have maintained their identity through each one." Kalor activated the crystal, scanning the information it contained. "The Council is not interested in culture, Professor. They demand submission." "Of course," Lear replied carefully, "but understanding why they resist may provide more efficient methods of conquest. Complete annihilation destroys resources that could otherwise serve the Empire." Kaylor recognized the careful dance of Lear's words. Direct questioning of council orders was treason, but strategic alternatives were permitted, even encouraged. It was part of what had made Kaylor so successful: his ability to adapt the council's broad directives into efficient military action. "What do you suggest?" Kaylor asked. "Their society centers around their children," Lear said. "They believe each generation carries forward not just their bloodlines, but their collective wisdom. It's why traditional conquest has failed. They accept death willingly, knowing their children will maintain their ways." Kaylor considered this information. "Then the children are the strategic target." "Precisely," Lear confirmed. "But rather than destruction, perhaps leverage. The capture of key children would likely bring about faster capitulation than planetary bombardment." "Hostages," Kaylor stated flatly. "Strategic assets," Lear corrected smoothly. "Who could then be integrated into the Empire, properly educated to serve Arthanis interests." Kaylor turned back to the viewport, watching as the stars blurred with the ship's transition to hyperspace. "I will consider your analysis, Professor." Dismissed. After Lear had gone, Kaylor remained at the viewport, contemplating the advice. It was sound strategy, and yet something about it disturbed him in ways he hadn't felt in decades. Perhaps it was fatigue. 50 years of continuous conquest would wear on any warrior. 300 worlds, he whispered to his reflection in the transparent steel. And one more to complete the Imperial vision. The journey to Khandra Prime took 3 standard weeks, during which Kaylor meticulously planned the assault. The system consisted of 5 inhabited planets orbiting a stable yellow star, with the eponymous Khandra Prime serving as the central world and seat of their loose governmental structure. As the Arthanis fleet emerged from hyperspace at the system's edge, Kaylor issued his first command: "Launch reconnaissance drones to all 5 planets. I want complete population centers mapped before we commence the attack." The data returned confirmed Professor Lear's assessment. The Kandran Society appeared to place extraordinary emphasis on their children, with elaborate educational complexes at the center of each major settlement. Their military capabilities were indeed minimal: a scattered defense force with outdated technology and no central command structure. "They cannot possibly believe they can resist," Vice Marshal Saren observed as they reviewed the reconnaissance data. "They have no planetary shields, no significant space fleet, no advanced weapons systems." "Their resistance is not military," Kaylor replied, remembering Lear's words. "Order the first wave to target their orbital satellites and communication arrays. I want them isolated before we begin ground operations." The initial assault proceeded with the efficiency that had become Kaylor's trademark. Within hours, Khandra Prime and its sister planets were cut off from each other and any potential outside assistance. Panic spread through their populations, visible even from orbit as lights flickered and movement patterns changed. Kaylor led the ground assault on Khandra Prime personally, something he had done less frequently in recent years but felt necessary for this final conquest. The dropships descended on the capital city like metallic predators, disgorging Imperial troops by the thousands. Surprisingly, there was little armed resistance. The Khandrans seemed to have accepted the inevitability of defeat, retreating into their central structures rather than facing the Imperial forces directly. "Suspicious," Kaylor muttered as he strode through the eerily quiet streets, his personal guard surrounding him. "Professor Lear, what is your assessment?" Lear, who had insisted on joining the ground team to observe Khandran culture firsthand, scanned the surrounding buildings with his analytical devices. They appear to have implemented some form of emergency protocol. The population has concentrated in the central educational complex. "A last stand?" Saren questioned. "No," Lear replied. "Something else. There are no weapons signatures, no defensive preparations." Kaylor raised his hand, signaling the troops to halt their advance. "They're protecting something." The central complex rose before them, a sprawling structure of curved architecture and soft, natural materials, a stark contrast to the angular efficiency of Arthanis design. No guards stood at its entrances, no barricades blocked their path. "Proceed with caution," Kaylor ordered. First wave, secure the perimeter. Second wave, with me. They entered the complex unchallenged, moving through corridors adorned with artwork and inscriptions in the Kandran language. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rhythmic footfalls of Imperial troops. Then, as they approached what appeared to be a central chamber, a sound reached them that none had expected. Singing. Kaylor raised his hand again, bringing the advance to a halt. Professor? Lear consulted his translation device. A traditional Kandran melody. A children's song, if I'm not mistaken. They welcome us with music. Saren's voice carried disbelief. Kaylor moved forward alone, his hand resting on his sidearm as he approached the entrance to the central chamber. What he saw there would forever alter the course of his life and the fate of the Arthonis Empire. The chamber was vast, its ceiling open to the sky above. Gathered within were hundreds of Kandran children, from infants to adolescents, arranged in concentric circles. Adults, presumably parents and teachers, stood protectively among them. At the center stood a small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old by human standards, leading the singing. No one fled as Kaylor entered. No one screamed or cowered. Instead, the singing continued. Though many eyes turned to observe the imposing figure of the Grand Marshal in his battle armor and mask. For the first time in decades of conquest, Kaylor found himself uncertain how to proceed. This was not a military target. There were no weapons, no defenses, only children singing in the face of annihilation. The small girl at the center stopped singing and stepped forward, her eyes meeting Kaylor's mask without fear. The other children fell silent, watching. Are you the one who has come to end our world? She asked in halting but clear Imperial standard, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. Kaylor found himself answering before he could consider the protocol breach. I am Grand Marshal Kaylor of the Arthonis Empire. Your system has refused Imperial rule, and the consequences are absolute. The girl tilted her head slightly. My name is Mira. I am 7 cycles old. She gestured to the gathered children. We are the future of Kandra. If you must end something, end it with us. Murmurs ran through the Imperial troops who had followed Kaylor into the chamber. This was not the resistance they had been trained to face, not plasma rifles or suicide attacks, but children offering themselves with dignity. Where are your military forces? Kaylor demanded, his voice harsher than intended. We have defenders, Mira replied, but they know they cannot defeat your weapons. Our strength is not in fighting. Then in what? Kaylor found himself asking. Mira's response was not in words. Instead, amidst the ashes of her world's independence, surrounded by the most feared military force the galaxy had ever known, she smiled. It was a smile of such genuine warmth and hope that Kaylor felt something long dormant stir within him, a memory of what it meant to be more than a conqueror. Secure the complex. He ordered his troops, turning away from that smile. No harm is to come to any civilian. I want all Kandran leadership identified and brought to the command post for negotiation. Negotiation? Saren questioned, her voice low enough that only Kaylor could hear. The council ordered. I am aware of the council's orders. Kaylor interrupted. But I will determine the most efficient method of subjugation. Inform the fleet to maintain orbital positions, but cease all bombardment preparations. As the Imperial forces spread throughout the complex, Kaylor found himself returning to where Mira stood, still watching him with that inexplicable smile. You should go with the others, he told her. Are you going to destroy our world? She asked again, unflinching. Kaylor should have answered affirmatively. It was the truth, after all. The Arthonis way had always been absolute. Resistance meant destruction. Yet he found himself unable to speak those words to this child. That has not yet been determined, he said instead. Mira's smile widened slightly. Then there is still hope. Hope is irrelevant, Kaylor replied automatically. The Empire's will is absolute. Is it? Mira asked, with the simple curiosity of a child rather than the defiance of a rebel. Then why haven't you destroyed us already? Before Kaylor could formulate a response, Professor Lear approached. Grand Marshal, we've identified their leadership structure. It appears to be a council of elders, currently gathered in a chamber below this level. Bring them up, Kaelor ordered, grateful for the interruption. To Mira, he added, return to your people. But as he turned to leave, he felt a small hand slip into his armored gauntlet. He looked down in shock to find Mira holding his hand, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Our elders say that to understand someone, you must walk with them, she said. I will walk with you to meet them. The absurdity of the situation, the most feared military commander in the galaxy being led by the hand by a Kandran child, was not lost on Kaelor. Yet he did not pull away, allowing her to guide him toward where the elders were being brought. The Kandran leadership proved to be 12 individuals of advanced age, their faces lined with wisdom rather than fear as they were presented to Kaelor. They bowed respectfully, but not subserviently. Grand Marshal Kaelor. One of them greeted him. I am Elder Thomas. We have been expecting the Empire's arrival for many years. Then you understand the futility of resistance, Kaelor stated. We understand the nature of power, Thomas replied calmly, and its limitations. Kaelor released Mira's hand, stepping forward to tower over the seated elders. The Arthonis Empire has conquered 300 worlds. Your understanding has not prevented any of them from falling. Conquest is not the same as victory, Grand Marshal. Another elder, a woman with silver hair, said softly, you may take our resources, control our movements, even end our lives, but you seek something beyond these things, do you not? True submission. The Council demands your complete surrender, Kaelor confirmed, or this world burns. And what do you demand, Grand Marshal? Thomas asked, his eyes shifting briefly to Mira, who had remained at Kaelor's side. The question caught Kaelor off guard. For 50 years, he had been the extension of the Council's will, their most perfect instrument of conquest. What he demanded had never been relevant. He began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps you do not know, the female elder suggested gently. Perhaps that is why you have not yet given the order to destroy us, despite your council's commands. Saren stepped forward, her patience clearly wearing thin. The Grand Marshal needs no psychoanalysis from conquered subjects. Your options are simple: immediate surrender and integration into the Empire, or extinction. There is no third path. There is always another path, Mira said, her voice small but clear in the tense atmosphere. The stars have many ways. Kaelor looked down at her, this child who showed no fear of him. You should not be here for these discussions, he said. Where are your parents? A shadow passed over Mira's face, the first break in her hopeful expression. They joined the stars during the last famine. Elder Thomas has cared for me since. Something in her simple statement of loss resonated with Kaelor in unexpected ways. He had overseen the deaths of billions, rendered countless children orphans without a second thought. Yet this one child's loss suddenly seemed to carry weight. I see, he said, his voice softer than intended. Grand Marshal, Lear interjected. Perhaps we should establish temporary headquarters and continue these discussions after proper analysis of the Kandran infrastructure. Kaelor nodded, grateful for the strategic pause. Agreed. Secure a suitable facility. The elders will remain under guard but are to be treated with respect. To the Kandran leadership, he added, you have 24 standard hours to consider your position. I suggest you use them wisely. As the Imperial forces dispersed to their assigned tasks, Kaelor found himself walking through the complex alone. Having dismissed his guard detail, he needed space to think, to understand the unexpected hesitation that had seized him. He found himself in what appeared to be a memorial garden, where stone monuments bore the names of Kandrans, who had joined the stars, as Mira had phrased it. The garden was beautiful in its simplicity, with small flowers, unlike any Kaelor had seen in his travels, growing between the monuments. They're called Stellaria, came a voice behind him. Kaelor turned to find Mira, who had apparently followed him. They only grow after great sadness, Our teachers say they're the tears of those who've gone before, coming back as something beautiful. You should not be following me, Kalor said, though without the authority he normally commanded. You looked lost, Mira replied simply. No one should be alone when they're lost. Kalor almost laughed at the absurdity. Him? Lost? He who had charted the conquest of 300 worlds. Yet the child's perception disturbed him because there was truth in it. He was lost, adrift in uncertainty for the first time in decades. These monuments, he said, changing the subject. They honor your dead? Mira nodded. Everyone who joins the stars gets a stone, so we remember them? She pointed to a smaller stone near the edge of the garden. That's my parents. Would you like to see? Without waiting for his response, she took his hand again and led him to the monument. It was modest compared to many others, inscribed with 2 names and a simple phrase in the Kandran language. What does it say? Kalor asked, surprising himself with his interest. Their light continues in their child, Mira translated. That's me. I'm their light now. Kalor stared at the stone, then at the child beside him. In 50 years of conquest, he had never stood before a monument to those who had fallen under his campaigns. The dead were statistics, acceptable losses in the grand strategy of empire. They were not names, not lights, not remembered with flowers. Do your people fear death? He asked suddenly. Mira considered the question with surprising seriousness for one so young. We don't want to die, she said finally. But we're not afraid of joining the stars. Everyone does. Eventually. Even conquerors, Kalor murmured. Even them. Mira agreed. Then, with the directness only a child could manage, she asked, Have you killed many people? The question should have angered him, or at minimum been dismissed as impertinent. Instead, Kalor found himself answering honestly. More than can be counted. Do you remember them? No. That's sad, Mira said, looking up at him with genuine pity. If no one remembers them, where do their lights go? Kalor had no answer. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he found himself considering the implications of what he had done, not in terms of strategic success or imperial expansion, but in the simple terms of lights extinguished without memory. I should return to my duties, he said abruptly, pulling his hand from hers. Will you come back to the garden? Mira asked. I could show you how to plant stellaria. That would not be appropriate, Kalor replied, his voice regaining some of its customary authority. Why not? Again, the simple question undermined his certainty. Why not indeed? Because he was the Grand Marshal? Because conquerors did not plant memorial flowers with children from subjugated worlds? Because I have duties to attend to, he said finally, the answer feeling hollow even to himself. Return to your elders, Mira. The coming days will be difficult for your people. As he walked away, Kalor felt the weight of the child's gaze following him. Something had changed within him, a crack in the perfect armor of his conviction. And through that crack, doubt had begun to seep. The following days saw the systematic occupation of Kandra Prime. Imperial forces established control centers in each major population area, cataloging resources and citizens with mechanical efficiency. The other planets in the system received similar treatment, their minimal resistance quickly overcome. Yet no destruction was ordered. The complete annihilation protocol commanded by the Royal Council remained uninitiated, a fact that did not go unnoticed by Kalor's officers. The Council expects a progress report, Vice Marshal Saren informed him on the 3rd day of occupation, her tone carefully neutral, but her meaning clear. They will want to know why the protocol has not been implemented. They stood in the command center established in what had once been a Kandran governmental building. Through the windows, Kalor could see Imperial troops patrolling streets where Kandran civilians moved about their business, subdued but not terrorized. Inform the Council that we are assessing the optimal method of resource extraction before destruction. Kalor replied, Professor Lear has identified valuable cultural artifacts that may enhance the Imperial archives. It was a thin excuse, and both knew it. the council cared little for cultural preservation. Their order had been clear: make an example of the last resistors. With respect, Grand Marshal Saren pressed, delaying the protocol risks being interpreted as hesitation. After 300 victories, hesitation now would be noteworthy. Kaelor turned to face his second-in-command. They had served together for nearly 30 years, and Saren had never questioned his decisions openly. That she did so now indicated the seriousness with which she viewed the situation. "Are you concerned for the mission, Vice Marshal, or for my standing with the Council?" he asked. Saren met his gaze unflinchingly. "Both, sir. Your legacy is one of absolute efficiency. The longer we delay, the more resources we expend on occupation rather than completion. And if I determine that complete destruction is not the most efficient path to securing this system for the Empire?" A brief flash of something, alarm perhaps, crossed Saren's features before her military discipline reasserted itself. "Then I would remind you of the Council's direct order, sir. They specifically required annihilation, not occupation." Kaelor turned back to the window. Below, he spotted a small figure that he immediately recognized as Mira, walking alongside Elder Thomas. They appeared to be distributing something to Imperial soldiers, small tokens that the troops accepted with varying degrees of awkwardness. "What are they doing?" he demanded. Saren followed his gaze. "The locals call it a peace offering, small carved stars. Supposedly they bring protection. Some of the troops have accepted them as souvenirs." Her tone suggested she disapproved of this fraternization. "And you allowed this?" Saren hesitated. "It seemed harmless, like, sir. The troops remain vigilant, and allowing small cultural exchanges has reduced tension in the occupied zones." Kaelor watched as Mira offered one of the carved stars to a particularly intimidating Arthanis soldier, whose helmet concealed any reaction. After a moment's hesitation, the soldier accepted the token, tucking it into a compartment on his armor. "Summon Professor Lear," Kaelor ordered suddenly. "I want a complete cultural analysis of these chondrons. There's something we're missing." Later that day, Lear presented his findings in Kaelor's private chambers. The professor's excitement was evident as he activated a holographic display showing various aspects of chondron society. "They're remarkable, Grand Marshal," Lear began. "Their entire social structure is built around knowledge preservation and transfer. Each generation is considered a living archive of their collective wisdom. This explains their focus on children," Kaelor observed. "Precisely. But it's more than mere education. They believe, quite literally, that memories can be passed down genetically. Their children undergo rituals to awaken ancestral memories." Lear's expression revealed his scientific skepticism. "Superstition, of course, but deeply ingrained." "Is there any evidence of such abilities?" Kaelor asked. The galaxy held many strange phenomena. He had learned not to dismiss unusual claims outright. "None that would satisfy Imperial science," Lear admitted. "But their historical records show an uncanny preservation of knowledge through periods when their civilization should have lost it. Through plagues, wars, natural disasters." Kaelor considered this information. Would destroying them truly end their resistance, then? If they believe their knowledge survives in diaspora communities? Lear's eyes widened slightly at the implication of Kaelor's question. "You're considering alternatives to the annihilation protocol?" "I'm gathering information," Kaelor corrected sharply. "Continue your analysis." "Of course." Lear adjusted the holographic display to show a map of chondron settlements. "There's another aspect that may interest you. The chondrons have a concept they call soul binding. They believe that meaningful connections between individuals create bonds that transcend physical existence." "Mysticism," Kaelor dismissed. "Perhaps," Lear acknowledged, "but it manifests in practical ways. Their diplomatic history shows remarkable success in creating alliances with former enemies. Several attempted invasions throughout their history ended with the invaders essentially being absorbed into chondron society." This caught Kaelor's attention. "They convert their conquerors?" "In a manner of speaking, not through force or indoctrination, but through connection. Lear seemed frustrated by the limitations of language to explain the concept. The carved stars they're distributing to our troops, for instance, they're not merely tokens, but invitations to connection. Kaylor remembered Mira's hand in his, her simple questions that had somehow pierced through decades of certainty. Was this what Lear meant by connection? Is this a known psychological warfare technique? He asked. If it is, it's extraordinarily subtle. Lear replied, I've found no evidence of manipulation or deception. They appear to genuinely believe in building relationships, even with those who come to conquer them. Before Kaylor could respond, his communication device activated with a priority signal. Grand Marshal, came the voice of the orbital command officer. We're detecting multiple ships entering the system. Imperial signatures. Kaylor exchanged a glance with Lear. They weren't expecting reinforcements. Identification, Kaylor demanded. Royal Enforcement Division. Sir, the flagship is the Adjudicator. A cold weight settled in Kaylor's stomach. The Adjudicator was the personal vessel of Special Enforcer Archon, the Council's executioner of last resort. His presence could mean only one thing. The Council had grown impatient with Kaylor's delay. Acknowledged, Kaylor replied. Prepare for their arrival. I'll receive Enforcer Archon personally. After ending the communication, Kaylor turned to Lear. It seems our time for analysis has run out. Professor? Lear's expression was grave. The Council sending Archon. They must suspect something beyond tactical considerations. They suspect hesitation, Kaylor said. And they are correct. I have not acted on their orders with my usual efficiency. He moved to the window, looking out at the Kandran city where Imperial occupation had proceeded with surprising smoothness. I have been distracted. By the girl, Lear stated rather than asked. Kaylor did not deny it. She asked me if I remembered those I've killed. And do you? No. Kaylor turned from the window. 300 worlds, billions of lives, how could I remember them all? Yet you remember her, Lear observed. One child among billions. Perhaps that is significant. Before Kaylor could respond, the communication device activated again. Grand Marshal, Enforcer Archon requests immediate docking clearance. His message indicates Council Priority Alpha. Granted, Kaylor replied. To Lear, he added, prepare all data on Kandran cultural significance. We may need to justify our tactical approach. But both men knew that no amount of data would satisfy Archon if he had come with direct Council orders. The Special Enforcer was notorious for his literal interpretation of Council directives and his merciless efficiency in carrying them out. The Adjudicator docked with an ostentatious display of power, its weapon systems remaining fully active, a breach of standard protocol that signaled Archon's state of mind. The Special Enforcer himself disembarked surrounded by his personal guard, elite soldiers whose loyalty was to the Council alone rather than the military hierarchy. Kaylor met them in the docking bay, his own honor guard at his back. The tension between the two forces was immediate and palpable. Enforcer Archon. Kaylor greeted him formally. Your arrival is unexpected. Archon was a compact figure whose physical presence belied the power he wielded. Unlike Kaylor, he wore no mask, his features visible for all to see, a calculated display of fearlessness. His cybernetic left eye glowed faintly, scanning Kaylor with analytical precision. Grand Marshal, Archon replied, his voice modulated to perfect neutrality. The Royal Council has expressed concern regarding the implementation of Protocol Absolute on Kandra Prime. My report to the Council explained that we are assessing optimal resource extraction before proceeding. Kaylor stated, Indeed. Archon's expression revealed nothing. The Council has considered your report and found it insufficient. I have been dispatched to oversee the immediate implementation of the protocol. The implication was clear. Kaylor had been superseded. It was a public humiliation that would have been unthinkable mere weeks ago. I see, Kaylor said, his own voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. Then we shall provide all necessary support for your mission. That won't be necessary. Archon replied, My forces are specifically equipped for planetary cleansing operations. Your troops will stand down and prepare for departure. The Council has determined that the Arthanis fleet is needed for border security operations elsewhere. This was more than supersession. It was removal. The Council was not merely taking the Kandra operation from Kalor, they were removing him from command entirely. The Council's orders are unexpected. Kalor said carefully, I would request clarification directly from the inner chamber. All necessary clarification has been provided to me. Archon stated, Your request is denied. You will transfer command authority immediately and prepare your fleet for departure within 12 standard hours. The docking bay had gone deathly quiet, every soldier present acutely aware of the power struggle unfolding before them. For 50 years, Kalor had been the unquestioned military authority of the Empire. To see him dismissed so summarily was shocking. I see, Kalor said again, his mind racing through options. Direct defiance would be treason, something he had never contemplated in 5 decades of loyal service. Yet the thought of Kandra Prime reduced to ash, of Mira and her people obliterated on the Council's whim, created a revulsion in him that he could no longer ignore. My forces will require 24 hours to properly transfer all operational data, he said finally. The occupation infrastructure is complex. Archon's cybernetic eye flashed briefly. 12 hours, Grand Marshal, not 1 minute more. He gestured to his guards. My teams will begin preparation for Protocol Absolute immediately. I suggest you inform the local population to facilitate an orderly process. With that, Archon strode past Kalor, his guards falling in around him as they headed for the command center. The message was clear. Kalor's authority on Kandra Prime had ended. Vice Marshal Siren approached as Archon departed. Your orders, sir? She asked quietly. Kalor realized that despite Archon's dismissal, his troops, his people, still looked to him for direction. Their loyalty was to him, not to a council emissary who had arrived without warning. Prepare the fleet as ordered, he said loudly enough for any of Archon's lingering agents to hear. Then, much more quietly, and find Elder Thomas and the girl Mira. Bring them to my quarters immediately. Use troops you trust absolutely. Siren's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded without question. At once, Grand Marshal. Within an hour, Elder Thomas and Mira had been discreetly brought to Kalor's private chambers. The elder's face was grave, suggesting he understood the situation's gravity, while Mira looked around the austere imperial quarters with undisguised curiosity. You have stars here too, she observed, pointing to a star chart on Kalor's wall. A tactical display of conquered systems. Not the same kind, Kalor replied, then turned to Tomas. A new imperial commander has arrived. He bears orders for your world's destruction. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the news with remarkable composure. We suspected this might come. Your hesitation gave us hope, but we knew the Empire's ways. Your hope was not misplaced, Kalor said, surprising himself with the words. I cannot allow this destruction to proceed. Tomas's eyes opened, shock evident on his aged face. You would defy your empire? I would defer its judgment, Kalor replied carefully. There may be a way to satisfy the Council's demand for submission without annihilation. What do you propose? Kalor had been considering this question since Archon's arrival. A public ceremony of surrender. Your leaders acknowledge imperial authority and agree to integration. In return, your people and culture are preserved. And if the new commander refuses this compromise? Then I must find another way, Kalor said, his resolve hardening. But you must prepare your people. Gather them in the central square at dawn. Make it appear as though you are assembling for the announcement of surrender terms. Mira, who had been examining Kalor's collection of conquest medallions, turned to him with that same penetrating gaze that had first unsettled him. You're going to help us, she said. It wasn't a question. I am attempting to find a solution that preserves life, Kaelor corrected, uncomfortable with her characterization. That's helping, Mira insisted. Why? Again, her direct question cut through his carefully constructed rationalizations. Why indeed? Why risk everything? His position, his legacy, perhaps his life, for this one world when he had allowed 300 others to fall. Because you asked if I remembered them, he said finally, and I realized I should. Mira nodded as though this made perfect sense. Then she reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew one of the carved star tokens. This is for you, she said, holding it out. Kaelor hesitated, then accepted the token. It was warm to the touch, carved from some native wood with intricate patterns etched into its surface. What does it mean? He asked. It means you're connected to us now. Mira explained. Whatever happens, you're part of our story, and we're part of yours. The simple gift affected Kaelor more deeply than he would have thought possible. In 50 years of conquest, he had collected countless trophies, weapons, cultural artifacts, symbolic keys to cities. Yet none had been freely given as a token of connection rather than surrender. I will do what I can, he promised, tucking the star into a secure pocket of his uniform. Now go with the elder. Prepare your people. After they had gone, Kaelor summoned his most trusted officers. The plan he outlined to them was dangerous, potentially treasonous, but to his surprise, none voiced objection. The Arthonis way has always been to conquer, not to destroy, he told them, bending imperial doctrine to his purpose. Enforcer Archon's interpretation of the Council's will is extreme and wasteful. We must ensure that imperial interests are truly served. By dawn, the central square of Khandra Prime's capital was filled with citizens, gathered as instructed by their elders. Imperial troops, Kaelor's troops, maintained the perimeter, their loyalties now secretly divided between their commander and the empire he had served for so long. Archon arrived with his personal guard, his expression darkening as he surveyed the assembled Khandrans. What is the meaning of this? He demanded of Kaelor, who stood waiting at the edge of the square. The local leadership wishes to formally surrender. Kaelor explained. A public ceremony to demonstrate their submission to imperial rule. Submission is irrelevant, Archon stated coldly. The council has ordered annihilation, not occupation. This ceremony is unnecessary. The council ordered an example be made, Kaelor countered. What better example than a former symbol of resistance publicly acknowledging imperial supremacy? Archon's cybernetic eye flashed as he assessed Kaelor. You continue to delay the inevitable, Grand Marshal. One might question your commitment to the Council's vision. My commitment is to the Empire's efficient expansion, Kaelor replied. Destroying potential resources serves no one. Their verbal sparring was interrupted by the approach of Elder Thomas, leading a procession of Khandran representatives. Among them walked Mira, her small figure dignified despite the gravity of the situation. We are prepared to acknowledge imperial authority, Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the now silent square. Archon's hand moved to his weapon. This charade ends now. Your world was condemned the moment you chose resistance. Grand Marshal, order your troops to clear the square. My forces will begin the cleansing protocol immediately. Kaelor knew the moment of decision had come. What happened next would determine not only the fate of Khandra Prime, but his own destiny. No, he said, the single word carrying the weight of 50 years of unquestioning service now ended. Archon's expression shifted from cold determination to genuine shock. You defy the Council's direct order? I defy unnecessary destruction, Kaelor replied, removing his ceremonial mask for the first time in public in decades. The crowd gasped at the sight of his face, older than many had imagined, lined with the years of conquest, but undeniably human. The Empire conquers to rule, not to destroy. These people offer submission. I accept it on behalf of Arthonis. Treason, Archon hissed, drawing his weapon. His guards followed suit immediately. In the name of the Royal Council, I relieve you of command. all Imperial forces will now answer to me. Kaelor's own troops raised their weapons in response, creating a standoff that threatened to erupt into violence at any moment. The Kandrins, caught between these opposing forces, remained frozen in place. Any Imperial soldier who follows this traitor will share his fate. Archon announced loudly, "The Council's will is absolute." For a terrible moment, the square balanced on the edge of catastrophe. Then, into this volatile silence, a small figure moved. Mira, walking calmly into the open space between the opposing forces. "Stop," she said, her voice somehow carrying despite its softness. "There's another way." Archon turned his weapon toward her. "Return to your people, child. This is not your concern." "It's everyone's concern," Mira replied, unafraid. "You want our world to submit? We will, but not to destruction." She turned to face Kaelor. And once again, she smiled. That same smile that had first cracked his perfect armor of conviction. In that moment, surrounded by weapons and hatred and the machinery of war, her smile shone like a beacon of something long forgotten in the Empire's endless expansion: hope. Without conscious thought, Kaelor found himself moving to stand beside her, placing himself between the child and Archon's weapon. The symbolism was lost on no one present. The Empire's greatest conqueror defending not his own forces, not a strategic position, but a single child from a world marked for destruction. "Lower your weapon, Enforcer," Kaelor commanded, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "There has been enough destruction." Archon's cybernetic eye flashed rapidly, calculating odds and outcomes. "The Council will have your head for this, Kaelor. 5 decades of service ended in disgrace." "Perhaps," Kaelor acknowledged. "But they will hear my reasoning first, and they will consider the benefits of a new approach to resistance." The standoff continued for several more tense moments. Then, surprisingly, it was Vice Marshal Siren who broke the impasse, stepping forward to stand beside Kaelor. "The Grand Marshal speaks with the wisdom of 300 conquered worlds," she announced. "I stand with his assessment." One by one, other officers joined them, until Archon found himself facing not just a rogue commander, but a united military front. His personal guard, elite though they were vastly outnumbered. Archon lowered his weapon slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is not over, Kaelor. The Council will hear of this defiance. They will hear of a more efficient path to galactic unity," Kaelor countered. "One that preserves resources rather than destroying them." As Archon and his forces withdrew, tension visibly drained from the assembled Kandrins. Mira looked up at Kaelor, her smile wider than ever. "You remembered," she said simply. Kaelor nodded, understanding her meaning perfectly. In choosing to defend her, to defend Kandra Prime, he had remembered what it meant to value life over conquest, something he had forgotten across the long decades of war. The days that followed saw a flurry of diplomatic activity unprecedented in Imperial history. Kaelor, officially suspended from command pending Council review, nevertheless worked tirelessly to craft a new framework for planetary integration, one that would preserve local cultures while acknowledging Imperial authority. The Royal Council, initially furious at his defiance, were gradually swayed by the practical benefits of his approach. Resources were preserved, resistance was minimized, and the Empire's expansion continued without the costly business of planetary reconstruction after annihilation. It was not an easy transition. Many within the Imperial hierarchy viewed Kaelor's actions as weakness, a dangerous precedent that might encourage other worlds to resist in hopes of similar treatment. Yet the efficiency of the new approach could not be denied, and the Council, ever pragmatic, eventually formalized what became known as the Kandra Protocol, integration with cultural preservation. For Kaelor himself, the change was more profound and personal. Having removed his mask, he found he could not put it back on. The face of the conqueror had been replaced by that of a mediator, a builder rather than a destroyer. 6 months after the standoff in the square, Kalor stood in the memorial garden where he had first truly spoken with Mira. The stellaria flowers had multiplied, covering the ground between the stone monuments with their star-shaped blooms. They grow better when they're tended with care, Mira said, appearing beside him as she often did, seeming to sense when he needed company. Like people. Kalor nodded, looking out over the garden that had expanded to include a new section, one dedicated to remembering worlds that had suffered under imperial conquest. It had been his idea, a place to acknowledge what had been lost even as they built something new. The Planetary Alliance representatives arrived tomorrow, he told her, 20 systems seeking to join the new framework. The Planetary Alliance had been another innovation, a structure within the Empire that allowed for local governance while maintaining imperial unity. It had been Mira who had suggested its basic principle, connection without domination. "Will you wear your formal uniform?" she asked. Kalor had abandoned his battle armor months ago, adopting simpler attire that reflected his new role. "No," he replied. "Those days are behind me." Mira nodded approvingly. "Good. You look better without all that metal." Kalor almost smiled, something he was relearning how to do after decades of expressionless command. "The Council has officially designated me Protector of Worlds rather than Grand Marshal, a diplomatic title for a diplomatic role." "And unofficially?" Mira asked with the directness that still sometimes caught him off guard. "Unofficially, I believe they still consider me something of a traitor," Kalor admitted, "or at least a disappointment." "They'll understand eventually," Mira said with the certainty of youth, "just like you did." Kalor looked down at her, this child who had changed the course of an empire with nothing more than a smile. "And what did I understand, exactly?" "That conquering isn't the same as connecting," she replied. "And connection is stronger, in the end." From a pocket, Kalor withdrew the carved star she had given him during those tense days of confrontation. He carried it always now, a reminder of the moment when everything had changed. "Connection," he repeated thoughtfully. 300 worlds conquered, and this is the first one I feel connected to. "It's not too late for the others," Mira said, taking his hand as she had that first day. "You can help them too." And in that moment, looking out over the memorial garden with its star-shaped flowers and monuments to the past, Kalor felt something he had not experienced in his 50 years of conquest: purpose beyond power, connection beyond control. The galactic warlord who had conquered 300 planets had indeed surrendered to a child's smile. But in that surrender, he had found a victory greater than any battlefield triumph: the restoration of his own humanity. As news spread throughout the galaxy of the changes on Khandra Prime, other worlds began to reach out, seeking not conquest, but connection. The Empire, ever adaptable, was transforming from within, guided by the unlikely partnership of a former conqueror and a child who had refused to fear him. "Come," Mira said, tugging at his hand. "The new stellaria are blooming in the East Garden. They're a different color, blue, like your eyes." Kalor allowed himself to be led, just as he had that first day. The path ahead was uncertain, the transformation of an empire never simple. But as he walked through the garden with Mira, he knew with absolute certainty that it was the right path, not just for Khandra Prime or the Empire, but for himself. The man who had forgotten how to remember had found his memory again in the smile of a child. And the galaxy would never be the same.